Are you a regular overthinker that has a lot of thoughts in their mind and you constantly need to collect all sorts of information about a lot of subjects that you think are interesting or are not making sense, and you're actually trying to make sense of them and then come to the conclusion that some things are never going to make sense? If you're like that and if you're autistic, you might be on a logic loop. Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer, and today we're going to talk about autistic people actually sliding into a logic loop, what a logic loop is, and how it has to do with the way we process things. If you'd like to know more about this subject, stay put because we're going to discuss it all. So, I got inspired by this topic because I found a video on TikTok. The video is from Lotus K. Her full name is Lotus RK, and she made a video about logic looping in autistic people. And I thought that was very interesting because I used to have these things myself, like a lot of the time, and I think it actually makes sense why we do that. And as I speak, I'm already noticing the logic loop inside myself because I am always trying to make sense of things, and now I'm trying to make sense of this topic. Which is the very essence of what we are going to treat today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to watch the video about logic looping, and I will be responding throughout the video on the things that she says. And at the end of the video, I will come with a useful metaphor and other conclusions in order to deal with logic looping. Because logic looping has its pros and cons. It can be really time consuming, or it can really enhance your life if you only know how to use it. So we'll be going through all of this today.
You may have heard that autistic people are very logical, but have you heard of something called logic looping? Because we are so wrapped up in things being logical or making sense, when something doesn't make sense to us, we loop on it. This could look like having to Google search something so we know the answer to something.
So about the Google search part, please don't call me out, Lotus. I really feel like I do that a lot if I need to have like a deeper answer than I already got from someone or that I could think of. I go on Google or ChatGPT and type my answer or question, so that I really get an extensive analytical answer out of it. For me, it's not just enough to hear a short explanation of why things are the way they are. So Google is my best friend because there's a lot of information on there that is very useful. You have to be careful though, because some information might not be true or just half true, but that's also something that we got. I feel that we are really able to filter out information on whether it's useful or not, just like a little scientist in our brain, which you will also talk about later in the video about our brains being a little scientific. Especially if I have some deeper feelings which I cannot really decipher, or I have a hard time actually analyzing what they mean, then I'm really trying to search on the internet for answers or see what other psychologists have to say about it, since, well, my own reflection can get me only so far. I also like to involve multiple perspectives in order to come to a conclusion because that makes it complete, if that makes sense.
Autistic people might find themselves very curious about the origins of something or how something is made or how it happened so that we know the answers to things. And sometimes when we don't know the answers, we really loop on it. And this can also look like a situation where something happens or something happens to us and we try to understand why. It could even be someone who hurt us, but we try to understand the other person's logic. Like, why would they do that?
I used to fall into this trap of analyzing people who did me wrong or hurt me like numerous times. I had it with people who were close to me that actually hurt me, and it felt really contradictory, because how can someone that loves me that much or claims that they love me that much hurt me so bad? So I actually really tried to dive into their thought process and what made them do what they actually did. Um, and I really find that this is not healthy for myself to do, because sometimes I even come to the conclusion that from their perspective, it might justify their reaction, but just because it justifies their reaction from their perspective doesn't mean that it's all right for me and that it is respectful and good for my health. So unconsciously, you might even agree with the way they behaved, and that's something I used to do in the past. And it's something I really try to get rid of lately, because I feel like it's not good for me to do that. And just because someone is right or seems right from their perspective doesn't mean that they should treat you that way. So that's really something to consider.
I have tried to psychoanalyze all sorts of people in my life
Yeah.
just to try to understand what made them do something, and been unable to let go of certain situations or people because I'm logic looping, because I'm like, how did you say one thing and do the other, or things of that sort.
Also, the things that I do are logically based, like a lot of the time. Before I make a decision, for example, I go to the gym, I go to work, I clean my room, I got like a schedule for almost everything, and I really searched and collected my information really thorough. So for me, it's really hard to get out of my own perspective sometimes, not always, but sometimes, and to realize that a lot of people don't do it like that. Sometimes they just do something because they have a certain kind of emotion about it, or they just do it on a whim, like spontaneous, or because they have certain beliefs that I don't have. And the difference with them and me is that even if I do believe something or I have an emotion, I don't let it dictate my whole decision. So I consider it, but I still am going to pick the decision that is logical in the grand scheme of things.
That's why when I heard about logic looping, it made a lot of sense to me as to why sometimes autistic people have a hard time letting go of things, is because unfortunately a lot of things don't make sense. And when we're constantly thinking that things need to make sense, when we think everything needs to make sense, it is a hard situation to put us in to try to figure out
Doesn't it
how
though?
everything works. Also, there's something called bottom up and bottom down thinking. And basically, it's that when people that are non autistic can kind of jump to a conclusion pretty fast, and then if there's any more details to be filled out, they'll do those later. Bottom up thinking is that we basically have to go through all of the options, all of the various things before coming to that conclusion, instead of just, it's like we
Yeah.
have scientific brains that need to experiment with every single option.
In the video, she's already explaining a lot of why we do this, but we do have a certain kind of processing. There are two types of processing information in the brain. Well, that is basically the simplified version of it, because there are a lot of processes, but this is really summarized in two of these categories. And one of them is a top-down approach, where you basically create the big picture first, and after that fill in the details as you go. Most of the neurotypical people do have this kind of processing, while we have a bottom up processing, which means that we first going to look at the details, like what something is made of, what kind of fabric, how is it working, like exactly, before we actually come to the conclusion of the big picture. So details first, big picture later with us, big picture first, details later with neurotypicals. And this has its benefits, but it also has its downsides in a world that is mainly focused on the way neurotypicals work. So our process is really innovative. Yeah, I do have trouble with that word. because we tend to have an associative brain and we're collecting all of these details out of thin air. It seems to be thin air for neurotypicals, but we exactly know where to place these details. And we look at each piece, turn it around, see what it does. And after that, we can actually zoom out, or, well, we're trying and see the bigger picture. What this does is that it gets us a lot of new ideas, a lot of fresh ways to approach things, and we come up with things that people might have never thought of. But it is not as efficient because it takes a lot of time, and time is money in this world. So a lot of jobs that really fit with this approach is programming computers, for example, because you really need to get to the root of code or a problem in the computer. Being a specialized doctor is actually really something that would fit our way of processing things, because you really need to get to the nitty gritty of the symptoms that patients are telling you, and you need to come up with a diagnosis or a treatment plan. Or, for example, being a scientist, because when you're a scientist, you really try to get an answer and a logic approach for your hypothesis. Doing research in general is really something that I enjoy, at least, and I know that a lot of autistic people also seem to enjoy it, while it also may be tiring at the same time. So it's really about finding that right kind of balance.
Before we could come to a conclusion, it's like we have to test every idea in our mind out. I can definitely relate to being very thorough, and a lot of people that are autistic are very thorough. They really feel like they have to go through
Mm-hmm.
everything, um, go through all the information before making a decision or before letting something go. It's like we just have to make sure that we really understood. Sometimes we have to let go that not everything will have an answer, and we won't always know all the answers. But I find this is something that upsets a lot of autistic people. Is
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes you could feel really upset or have a hard time letting go of a situation, and I sometimes wonder, like, are you really heartbroken? Are you and like you might be, but also is it like you're kind of logic looping, and that's what's really upsetting you? Is like you just never got an answer from this person or the situation on why, and you find not knowing why like super severely distressing, and like that's what's a big part of what's actually upsetting you about this. It's not even that you're so hurt, you just want to know why. You just want to know what their logic was. You just want to know the logic to people, and so like so many autistic people become like they could be like therapists or like psychologists, like just trying to understand people and things, because like
I really need to talk about the fact that she speaks about the reasons why some autistic people become social workers or therapists or psychologists, because I really feel called out there. For me, it's always been about analyzing why people behave the way they do, and not only analyzing it and coming to the bottom or getting to the bottom of it, it's also about trying to help them see their patterns and see what makes them move, or just trying to touch on the things that seem invisible for clients so that we can work it out together, if that makes sense. And to do that, you really need to be able to, you need to have both skills, by the way. That's very important to note here, but you also need to be able to look at that tiny detail that a client says and be like, oh, but did you notice that you said this? And how does this? And how does that? Because that will lead to new insights over time. So I really feel like that's also the reason, well, the simplified reason for why I like to be a social worker and understand people and support them.
it because we can be so logical, and we when things don't have answers we logic loop. And so if we could just understand psychology more, not just to better understand social cues and humans, but to to again get a more of understanding of why people act the way we act. And I think it settles our nervous systems when we know why, and feels really dysregulating when we don't know why, for whatever reason, for autistic people. And asking the question why so much. I need to understand. And any simple answer like, well, that's just the way the world is, or
No,
that's
won't
just the
do.
way some people are, is never enough of an
No.
explanation. If someone tries to give you a really simple answer as to why that happens in the world or why people do that, it's like that I can't just accept that's just the way some people are.
No, we don't agree to simple answers. Do you recognize that someone is telling you something, and throughout the story you're like, but how does this work and how does that work? And you're basically not understanding the short explanation of what they're telling you, and you're trying to ask more and more questions to really get a good grip of the situation and analyze everything around it. And they're just simply like, I don't know, it's just the way it is. Why are you asking so many questions? Or, I don't know, like all the time. And you're like, but how could you not know? You're obviously talking about this topic, so you must know this, this, and this, and this, Why? And we can't seem to accept the fact that they don't know the answers. And that's really hard because our brains just work different, and we are actually trying to get to the bottom of things. So, to summarize all of the traits that occur with logic looping, is as follows. You're an overthinker for like a lot of the time. You're trying to get to the bottom of things. You can't just accept the fact that things are the way they are. You are searching a lot of information on the internet or at your study work whatsoever. You're trying to collect as much information as possible and really dive into the topic, like being really hyper focused on those subjects. If this is you, you might be logical looping. But we're not only going to talk about my experiences and what it actually means, we're also going to talk about what you can do with this talent, because in a way it's a talent, and I know that it can feel like a burden. I absolutely do know that. But I also know that there is a lot of things you can actually do with it in a constructive way. And I want to talk about that while reading you a metaphor that I came up with. Imagine life as a fast flowing river. For most people, the river runs smoothly, carrying them along its currents. These people are the neurotypicals. They float with the river, trusting its course, believing that the river is just the way it is. When they encounter a rock or a rapid, they accept it as part of their journey, thinking, sometimes the river is just like this. Now, imagine a group of skilled divers, the neurodivergents. Unlike the floaters, they are constantly diving beneath the surface, exploring the depths, examining the currents, trying to understand why the water moves as it does, why the rocks are where they are. For them, the river is not just a surface experience, it's a complex system of hidden forces and patterns. When they encounter a rock or a rapid, they feel compelled, to understand why it's there, to analyze it, and to dissect the river's flow. However, this constant diving can be exhausting. While they discover things that others might never see, they also spend much more energy navigating the river. Sometimes they might even struggle against the current, feeling overwhelmed by the need to understand every twist and turn. But over time, these divers can learn a crucial skill: the art of selective diving. They can learn to float sometimes, accepting that not every rock needs to be understood or every rapid analyzed. They realize that occasionally letting the river carry them without diving deep allows them to conserve energy and enjoy the ride more. They still have the ability to dive deep when necessary, but they also learn to appreciate that sometimes the river just is the way it is, and that's okay. There's a hair on me and it's itchy. Please get it off me. Yeah, it's gone. So that's really the difference between using your trait to analyze every bit for your benefit, or when you do it too much, it turns into logic looping. I think we will be the most happy if we're able to dive into various topics. So, in a way, it's really part of us and it will never go away. And that's all right. You don't need to get rid of something or change it entirely. But what's important is that you're going to explore where you can actually use that aspect of yourself, where it's welcomed, and where it's necessary even. So for me, that means that I really like to dive into a lot of psychology topics. For example, I like to understand the way people work. That's also why I am a social worker, for example. But that's not the only thing I want to do to let my interest really come to surface. So, what do? I make this video for you, and I make multiple videos because I really want to get into depth of something, but I cannot necessarily always do that at my job. So that's why I do it here. Or I go to the gym. And what I can do with like my analyzing trait is that I can really think through a food schedule or a exercise program in which I need to take all of the stuff into consideration. All of the tiny details matter here. So that's what actually makes me happy. And as you notice, those are things that I can do in my free time a lot of the time. You'll be able to do less of that at your job most of the time because you're bound by time, well, by a lot of elements that makes it harder to dive into a lot of subjects. But find yourself one or two things in your free time where you can actually make use of your skill because it is very important to do so. If that's the way your brain works, it's going to feel energized and it's going to be the way you recharge yourself in certain kind of situations. And that's what you need because life around us is already really stressful as it is. So thank you for watching my video. I really hope that the information was useful, and if you liked it, please don't forget to support me. Like, subscribe, and don't forget to click on the notification bell so you won't be missing any more of my videos. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you the next time. Bye!